Welcome to Grandmaster Video Magazine. I'm Simon Kelton and I'm going to be presenting you a world first, regular international chess on video. First, we're going to begin with some of the best chess from this year. That's the British Championship game between Chris Ward and Mihai Suba. Chris Ward, a rising British star, will be playing against this formidable Romanian opponent, a man defecting from the East and now living in this country. For expert commentary, we have our editor in the studio with me now, Grandmaster David Norwood. David, what sort of battle do you expect from these two players?
I predict a sharp fight. Chris Ward is going to be eager for another Grandmaster scalp, I'm sure. Also, he has the benefit of the white pieces. Mihai Suba is renowned for being a very dangerous Grandmaster, a really uncompromising player. I think we can expect them both to go all out today.
David, I presume both players will be on familiar ground with this opening.
Yes. By transposition we now have one of the main lines of the Nimzo-Indian defence. This is currently very fashionable. In fact, Suba is a particular expert in this line, if I remember correctly. Rather than castling, white forces the bishop to take a decision. In fact, in a recent Olympiad, world champion Garry Kasparov selected this same move against Suba. After bishop takes knight and pawn takes knight, the world champion obtained a really difficult position. He was even lucky to draw. I wonder what improvements Chris Ward may have in mind. Combinations have become almost synonymous with the world champion Garry Kasparov, so it won't surprise anyone to see him in action here. In the following game, he's playing against the Dutchman Jan Timman. As usual, he's in his King's Indian with the black pieces. On move 19, he comes out with a blockbuster. Knight takes f2. If Timman recaptures with the king, king takes f2, then simply knight g4 check, and black's pieces are storming in after queen takes e3. So Timman had to play queen takes the knight on f2. Now knight g4, hitting the queen, queen f3, and then knight takes e3. Note that the rook on d1 is attacked and black just wants to take it. But where can the rook go to? If it goes to d2, then knight takes c4, forking both the bishop on b2 and the rook on d2. If it goes to d3, again the same thing, knight takes c4, hitting the bishop on b2, but also black has the threat of knight e5 at the end of it all, forking the queen and the rook. Really, Timman's position is crumbling. So, Timman tries a counter combination, rook to e1. Kasparov takes off the knight on d4. Now white's position looks absolutely dreadful, but Timman has a counter combination, knight to d5. But he is up against world champion, and Gazza has it all under control. He plays knight g4 check, discovered check. Now, the bishop on d4 must be captured. This Timman does. And now Kasparov plays queen takes e1. White must recapture, and the black rook takes off again on e1. And now, as you can see, white must block with bishop f1. Kasparov continues, c takes d5, and after queen takes d5, you can see that black has got two rooks for the queen. But White's king is still exposed, and even without the queen, Kasparov is a master of attack. He continues to build up pressure. In March, the 5th Oakham International was held at Oakham School, Rutland. This event was almost certainly the strongest junior tournament of all time, with 6 Grandmasters participating, including the 2 superstars, Alexei Shirov of Latvia and Michael Adams of England. Before the start of round 1, some amusement was caused by the ex-Soviet players in deciding which flags they were going to have. The hammer and sickles were there for anyone to take, but no one seemed to want to play under them. One of the most amusing aspects was when Vladimir Akopian, the world junior champion from Armenia, was asked whether his Armenian flag was correct. His reply stunned us a little. He said, "Well, I wouldn't know. All I know is that it's got 3 colours in it." Anyway, Vladimir Akopian did know what he was doing in this next game, which was taken from round 3. The game starts quietly enough. White opens c4, black replies e5. g3, knight f6, bishop g2, knight c6, knight c3, g6, e3, bishop g7, knight g2, black castles, and white castles.
Dortmund, 1992, one of the strongest chess tournaments of the year, featuring not only most of the young pretenders to the chess throne, with perhaps the exception of Nigel Short, but also the world champion himself. Along with Garry Kasparov, we had Vasily Ivanchuk, who many people, including Kasparov himself, I think, regarded as the main threat to his title in this World Championship cycle, but who was removed from it by Arthur Yusupov earlier in the cycle. Yevgeny Bareev, who has been rated number 4 in the world, and a very dynamic, exciting young Russian. Viswanathan Anand, well, who knows what to say about him? He's an almost unique phenomenon in the chess world, a man who moves so fast you can't believe it. Mr. Kamsky, another super prospect, who dealt the world champion a very serious blow, as we'll see later on. The product of some hard training by his father, originally a Russian, now playing board 1 for the United States of America. Another enormously exciting prospect. Salov, not so young as he was. If you're getting towards 30, you regard as over the hill in the chess world, but still a man capable of beating just about anybody on his day and has won some of the world's most prestigious tournaments. And then the German number 1, Robert Hübner, a man not only a very strong chess player, possibly also the world's strongest non-Chinese chess player. Indeed, he has the distinction of being the only Westerner ever to have beaten a Chinaman at Chinese chess. Very interested in board games, very intellectual, very good at chess. Michael Adams, British chess champion in 1989. I can tell you that with confidence because he beat me in the penultimate round to take the lead in the tournament. Tremendously exciting player, one of the best fast chess players in the world. Recently won the World Speed Chess Championship in Brussels. Then we had Alexei Shirov, who would have been called a Russian a few years ago, but is now more accurately termed a Latvian. He is unquestionably the top Latvian player of the day since the death of the great Mikhail Tal, and is currently heading for a world rating of in excess of 2,700. Could be ranked in the top 4 or 5 in the world around now. Very, very exciting chess player, brilliant tactician. Then, finally, last but not least, we have Jeroen Pickett from Holland. He is really the only outstanding Dutch prospect of the last 15 or 20 years who could really threaten the supremacy of Jan Timman as the top Dutch player. It was an all-play-all event, and during the 9 days of competition, no less than 11,000 spectators paid 12 marks a man to watch chess of the very highest level. At the end of each round, it was quite customary for the players to be surrounded by 100 or more people pressing for their autographs. Right in the opening round, there was a very auspicious clash between the young Latvian star, Alexei Shirov, and the world champion, Garry Kasparov. It wasn't just an important game because it was the first game of a big tournament for Kasparov. It's the first time he's played against Shirov, who was heading for a ranking in the top 3 or 4 in the world prior to this tournament, but who hadn't actually played Kasparov or Karpov yet. So ELO ratings are one thing, playing the very best is another. Well, he opened with the D-pawn.
This was my new plan, just to develop my knight on this square. And he played to gain some space in the center, and I undermined his pawn structure.
And the tension was well too much for me at that moment.
No, this is, this is what being a chess player is all about.
I have a message from Nigel, which is that he would like some champagne cracked open, because I believe these people are going to be do our best.
Jan is a gentleman. We played this match. We were just trying to play good moves, and it was very tense, but, we are simply playing chess. The match against Kasparov will be completely different, and it will be quite nasty. So this is all part of his plan to intimidate, belittle. He doesn't mind making himself very unpleasant. He's actually thoroughly unpopular with his with his colleagues. In fact, he has almost no respect at all from any of his colleagues, because he's such a thoroughly unpleasant person.
Bobby Fischer, perfectionist. Short, lost on time.
This is probably the first time in the World Championship match when my opponent lost on time in the position which is, I think, was Troyish.
He's resigned. And Short has resigned. Hopeless situation. There's nothing to do. And Short has had enough.
Not another tragedy. I can't believe this.
Oh, good grief. He knows he's missed something terrible.
Yes, he's played it. Way! There we go.
Fantastic.
This is surely time.
And Kasparov's resigned. Yes! Well done, Nige.
It's a relief.
A relief? More than that, surely.
I think it's not before time.
Short is offered a draw.
He's offered
And Kasparov's taken it.
Yes, draw agreed.
Draw
Kasparov
agreed.
won the match.
That's it.
Historic moment.
Gary, I want to know how you're going to celebrate.
I don't have any special celebrations, you know. This is the 5th time I won the title, and you know, it's you get used to it.
Maybe a little cake?
This man is the greatest chess player Britain has ever had. Since he was a child, commentators have predicted that one day he would challenge for the World Championship. Now that day has arrived. The Times World Chess Championship opens in London on the 7th of September. Nigel Short, the first ever British-born challenger for the title, will face the reigning world champion, the Russian Garry Kasparov. This is the first time a Westerner has contended for the title since Bobby Fischer's victory against Fischer-Spassky in Reykjavik in 1972, when Nigel Short was 6 years old. Now 28, Nigel, who's been training in Athens, has fought his way convincingly to this ultimate challenge. Last year in Linares, he beat the former world champion Anatoly Karpov. In January this year, he trounced the Dutch contender Jan Timman at El Escorial in Spain. Only one man now stands between Nigel and the crown, Garry Kasparov, by far the strongest, most successful player the world has ever known. But as the match approaches, the chess world is in turmoil. Both men have been outlawed by the International Chess Federation, FIDE. With millions at stake, we explore why.
"5 years ago, would anyone have been able to predict this scene? The world's chess-playing elite gathered in the Kremlin fighting for a fistful of dollars. This is the first of 4 Intel World Chess events, with New York, London and Paris to follow in the Grand Prix series. 16 of the world's best players in a knockout tournament, gunning for prize money of $160,000. In each match, 2 games would be played, with colours alternating, the players having just 25 minutes for all their moves. If after this scores were level, a sudden death blitz game would decide who went through to the next round. The venue was the splendid auditorium of the Palace of Congress, situated inside the Kremlin itself, with a magnificent backdrop created by the Bolshoi Ballet's set designer. Indeed, the last time I was present at the Kremlin, I was part of a rapt audience watching the Bolshoi perform. The crowds were no less enthusiastic for this event. Each day, 2,000 to 3,000 people would gather to watch the games, which they were able to follow on giant electronic screens. Chess is still a central part of Russian culture. The first match of the first round provided the first upset. Russian émigré prodigy Gata Kamsky, now a US citizen, was knocked out by one of the players from the qualifying tournament, Vladimir Malanyuk from the Ukraine. Malanyuk won the first game in smooth positional style, employing his favourite Dutch defence. Then in the second, just needing a draw to go forward into the next round, he battened down the hatches, allowing Kamsky no attacking chances at all. At the end, Malanyuk had even gone onto the attack, though played it safe and forced a draw, when in other circumstances he might well have gone for the win. Malanyuk has proved himself to be a competent GM on the tournament circuit, though has never broken through into the top ranks of chess. Perhaps this event will be a starting point for him. The clash between the Indian star Vishy Anand and Ilya Smirin, a Soviet emigre now resident in Israel, was much closer than one might have predicted. Anand plays his normal tournament games at breakneck speed, so at 25-minute chess he is very much at home. It just means that his opponents have even less time. Smirin was wiped in the first game, but came back brilliantly in the second, tricking Vishy at the end of a highly complex struggle. With a score at 1-1, they then went into the sudden death blitz game. For this, some novel rules were introduced to ensure a decisive result. The player with the white pieces was given 6 minutes, while black had 5, but if the game resulted in a draw, then black would go through. In this blitz playoff, one would have thought that the extra minute would play a significant role, but in the event, given a choice, most of the players preferred to have less time, but the option to draw with black. We pick up the action in the blitz game, with both players now down to their final minute. They both have a rook and 4 pawns each, and the position is looking drawish, but remember, Smirin, playing white, needs to win the game, and a draw would do fine for Anand. So Anand just having everything under control here. There's only one thing to watch out for, and that's that passed D pawn in the centre of the board. Smirin just pushing it on now. But this is where the game turns. Anand blunders, he moves his king back to the wrong square, and the rook comes over defending the pawn. Now Anand can't move his rook, so he's in trouble. Now the kingside pawns go. And he transposes into a king and pawn ending. He's managed to swap rooks, and now Smirin has 3 pawns against Anand's 2 in the king and pawn ending, which should be a win for Smirin. But Anand defends brilliantly. With no time on his clock, he finds some very clever, tricky defensive moves. Gives up another pawn, but it's only a temporary sacrifice, and that's in order to get his king into a very strong position. He finds a series of only moves here to draw the game. Now Smirin can't move his king forward, so he has to go back. Just repeats the position, but he's not making any progress at all. So he moves the king backwards, hoping to find another route in, but that allows Anand his chance. He just hesitates, but he can see it's a draw. And both players pushing their pawns down to make a queen, so they both have a queen and a king each, and that's a draw. It's a theoretical draw. So Anand goes through into the next round. Let's run through the final moments of that game again. This is the position where Smirin played his pawn to d7 check. Anand moved his king back to f7, but that was actually a mistake. Perhaps one shouldn't criticise moves that were made. First stop Moscow, next stop New York. The second of the Intel Grand Prix speed tournaments breezed into the Big Apple, its mission to show to the American public that chess can be just as exciting as any other sport. Not an easy task, but anyone who attended the Javits Center in Manhattan would have experienced as much drama and action as any baseball or football match. The stage set was specially designed with the public in mind. There were 4 giant screens behind the players showing the position on the board, clock times, and close-ups of the contestants. 16 of the world's strongest players were fighting it out for a prize fund of $160,000, including the world champion Garry Kasparov, desperate for success after his failure in the first event in Moscow, Vishy Anand from India, eager to repeat his victory in Russia, Vladimir Kramnik, Judith Polgar, and Nigel Short and Michael Adams from England. A class field, and in 25-minute chess, everyone has a chance of winning. The knockout format heightens the tension. In each match, 2 25-minute games are played, and then if the scores are level, then a sudden death blitz game decides who goes through. It was the defenders who emerged victorious in the first 2 round of 16 matches. First, the Sarajevan refugee Predrag Nikolic clung on against the Moscow speed demon Alexei Vizhmanovin in the 25-minute games, and then triumphed in the blitz shootout. Garry Kasparov will not look back on the London leg of the Intel World Chess Grand Prix Series with fond memories. In the very first match of the tournament, he was pitted against a silicon monster that devoured him with the minimum of emotion and the maximum publicity. A lethal combination of Chess Genius software running on Intel's powerful new Pentium processor, turned what was widely expected to be a walkover for Kasparov into the world champion's worst nightmare. Since the Pentium Genius is a computer and not a robot, a human operator will read the moves off the screen and then play them out on the board. In Game 1 it seemed as though he was gaining the upper hand. Here he played his pawn to b4, attacking the bishop. Pentium Genius captured on e3, the queen recaptured. And now, if black exchanges queens, queen takes e3 check, the knight takes e3, this position looks tremendous for white.
I had so little luck in all these Grand Prix tournaments that I was afraid of my own shadow. Yeah, for me that's why I came to Paris. Yeah, it's a day of judgment.
Paris was the grand finale of the 1994 Intel World Series. The three clear favourites to win the Grand Prix were Moscow winner Viswanathan Anand, New York winner Vladimir Kramnik, and London winner Vasily Ivanchuk. Kramnik was just 1 point ahead of Ivanchuk and Anand, who were tied for second. World champion Garry Kasparov had only an outside chance of claiming the overall Grand Prix. To achieve his goal, not only would he have to win in Paris, where Grand Prix points counted double, but he would have to trust that none of his main rivals would even reach the final. The first round saw the beginning of a miracle. After all the tension of the London victory, Vasily Ivanchuk's nerves finally failed here in Paris. His first-round opponent, Ilya Smirin from Israel, held him to 2 uneventful draws, which brought them to the lottery of the shootout. Ivanchuk won the toss and selected the black pieces, meaning that a draw would be enough to send him through, though in accordance with the shootout rules he would only start with 5 minutes to Smirin's 6. It was clear that the Ukrainian felt ill at ease from the opening, and as he dawdled nervously both his position and his time began to deteriorate. Under extreme pressure, he simply froze. He might have been playing a postal game. Smirin couldn't believe his luck. He had only to make legal moves for Ivanchuk's time to run out. And as it was, he even landed a killer punch. Ivanchuk had blown it. Such was the success of the first Speed Chess Grand Prix that Intel were keen to repeat the series in 1995. Moscow was again the starting point, with the circus moving on to New York in June, London at the end of August, and the grand finale in Paris in November. The world's elite were again tempted by large prize money and the dramatic knockout format where anything can happen, as the world champion was to find out in round 1. This was the kind of action that for a few days made chess an even bigger attraction than Lenin's tomb in Red Square. Kasparov played Vladimir Yepyshin, a piquant encounter as Yepyshin acts as second and analyst for the world champion's arch-rival Anatoly Karpov. It was rumoured that Yepyshin had actually consulted Karpov by telephone before the game. Game 1 was a tense draw ending in perpetual check, but in Game 2, Yepyshin found himself in trouble. Kasparov is playing black, Yepyshin white. Now Kasparov's been building up the pressure for some time. He has this beautiful bishop on e5, which looks in all directions, beautiful piece, and the knight on h5 combines with the bishop to pressurise this point on g3, rather nasty. There are also the doubled rooks, which barrel down towards white's king. The second of the Intel Speed Chess Grand Prix series took place in New York in June. 16 of the world's top players gathered to do battle for a whopping total prize fund of $160,000. There are 4 players who've really made their mark in these events: Garry Kasparov, the world champion, Vladimir Kramnik from Russia, Vasily Ivanchuk from the Ukraine, and Viswanathan Anand from India. They were all there apart from Anand, who felt unable to take time off from his preparations for his forthcoming World Championship match against Kasparov. Apart from the world's elite, there was plenty for the partisan Manhattan crowd to cheer in the shape of Grandmaster Nick de Firmin from the West Coast and Grandmaster Larry Christensen, who's long been one of America's most successful players on the European circuit.
Christensen had the crowd on the edge of their seats in the very first round against Russian émigré Artur Yusupov. After a draw in the first game, Christensen, playing black, found himself under great pressure in the second. Christensen had sacrificed a pawn in the opening, but here it looks as though his compensation is drying up. His d-pawn is perhaps his major asset. It's protected, but it's very hard to see how he can push it forward. The bishop here, which at one time looked very dangerous, is securely blocked by the pawn on e4. London 1995, and the best chess players are in town again. Even though the Gang of Four, Kasparov, Kramnik, Ivanchuk and Anand, are acknowledged as being the finest speed players in the world, it's surprising how they've dominated the Intel World Chess Grand Prix series since its inception in 1994. However, London 95 proved to be a mould breaker. Tony Mars from England was making his debut in the Grand Prix and was pitched straight in at the deep end in round 1 against last year's overall winner of the series, Vladimir Kramnik. Miles was Britain's first Grandmaster and is still a fierce fighter on the tournament circuit. As we can see here, he also has a fierce dress sense. Miles played a quiet, practical opening, and they reached a position that was typical for a queen's pawn opening. Here we can see that white has the typical minority attack on the queen side. Miles, as white here, is looking to push the pawn forward to b5 to break up the queenside pawns and open up lines for his rooks. Kramnik, on the other hand, is trying to set up an attack against Miles' king. Now we can see he's already swung his rook over and is looking at some moment to push the g-pawn forward to g4. Now at the moment, Miles is causing a little bit of confusion, a little bit of trouble on the king side with his queen and his knight, making it rather awkward for black to actually pursue his attack. And for instance, it's impossible to push forward with g4 because the pawn is simply en prise to the pawn, queen and the knight. So Kramnik wanted to force the knight backwards before pushing on with the attack, so he played pawn to f6, which on the face of it looks reasonable. But instead of retreating the knight back to d3, Miles played a superb sacrifice. Knight takes c6, really unexpected, because Kramnik's pieces look very well placed. The knight on e4 in particular looks great. Of course he captured the knight, so rook takes c6, and surprisingly white has excellent compensation for the piece here. Not only is another pawn vulnerable on the queen side, but actually Kramnik's king is a little bit insecure, because there are threats to move the queen into f5 and then rook c8 check. And just for a moment, that rook on h6 is appallingly placed. It's Paris, the grand finale of the 1995 Intel World Chess Grand Prix. And the race for the overall title for 1995 was wide open. No fewer than 5 players could still win. The mercurial Vasily Ivanchuk, who won in Moscow. Vishy Anand, the Indian genius who defeated Kasparov earlier in the year in Moscow and was a semi-finalist in London. Michael Adams, who won in London and is finally fulfilling his great promise. Vladimir Kramnik, still only 20 years old, though he's already established himself in the world's elite. And of course, the freshly recrowned world champion, Garry Kasparov. But was he really in any condition to play in Paris? He admitted at the start of the tournament that he'd much rather be on a beach in the Caribbean. One by one, these 5 were whittled down to just 2. Michael Adams fell at the first hurdle when he was knocked out in the round of 16 by France's finest, Joël Lautier. Vasily Ivanchuk was edged out by Vladimir Kramnik, and Kasparov bumped out Anand in the semi-final, which set up the showdown between Kasparov and Kramnik, the big rivals from last year's Grand Prix. The 1995 PCA Grand Prix finished with the ultimate duel between the two speed chess titans, Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov. In a thrilling finale, Kasparov came back from the brink of defeat to snatch a remarkable victory.
What a fantastic Garry Kasparov losing the first game, coming back, winning the second one, and now the second blitz game with the black pieces.
Le vainqueur de partie de tournoi Grand Prix Intel, champion du monde Garry Kasparov.
It wasn't hard to predict that the same players would top the bill in the 1996 series. And as well as Kramnik and Kasparov, there was the Indian speed king himself, Fischer-Anand. It was to be these three who would create the thrills and spills of 1996.